Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other. Jennifer Levin.
Thank you, sir. You talked in your remarks earlier today about other nations needing to accept, less than perfect in their view. Can you talk about what you gave up and where you might have shifted the U.S. position to get to this point? And also, if this was so hard to get to, just what you have today, how do you feel confident about getting to a legally binding agreement in a year?
I think it is going to be very hard, and it's going to take some time. Let me sort of provide the context for what I saw when I arrived. And I think it's important to be able to stand in the shoes of all the different parties involved here. In some ways, the United States was coming with a somewhat clean slate because we had been on the sidelines in many of these negotiations over several years. Essentially, you have a situation where the Kyoto Protocol and some of the subsequent accords called on the developed countries who were signatories to engage in some significant mitigation actions and also to help developing countries. And there were very few, if any, obligations on the part of the developing countries. Now, in some cases, for countries that are extremely poor, still agrarian and so forth, they're just not significant contributors to greenhouse gases. But what's happened, obviously, since 1992 is that you've got emerging countries like China and India and Brazil that have seen enormous economic growth and industrialization. So we know that moving forward, it's going to be necessary, if we're going to meet those targets, for some changes to take place among those countries. It's not enough just for the developed countries to make changes. Those countries are going to have to make some changes as well. Not at the same pace, not in the same way, but they're going to have to do something to assure that whatever carbon we're taking out of the environment is not just simply dumped in by other parties. On the other hand, from the perspective of the developing countries like China and India, they're saying to themselves, per capita, our carbon footprint remains very small, and we have hundreds of millions of people who don't even have electricity yet. So for us to get bound by a set of legal obligations could potentially curtail our ability to develop, and that's not fair. So I think that you have a fundamental deadlock in perspectives that were brought to the discussions during the course of this week. And both sides have legitimate points. My view was that if we could begin to acknowledge that the emerging countries are going to have some responsibilities, but that those responsibilities are not exactly the same as the developed countries. And if we could set up a financing mechanism to help those countries that are most vulnerable, like Bangladesh, then we would be at least starting to reorient ourselves in a way that allows us to be effective in the future.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.